Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon to you, or rather almost good evening now. My name is Baria Alamuddin. I'm sorry, it's a difficult name, rather a long one. I am Lebanese British, and I am a journalist and a writer, and I will be moderating this session on Syria. I'm going to introduce you to my panelists here. On my right, His Excellency, Mr. Falah Mustafa Bakir. He is the head of the Department of Foreign Relations in Kurdistan. And then on my left here, it's Ambassador Aleksander, and I must admit he has a difficult name, even more difficult than me. So
for Russian, it is also Aksenenok.
Okay, thank you very much for helping me there.
Yes.
And then next to Ambassador Alexander, there is Manal Omar. And Manal is originally Palestinian. She's Palestinian American, and she lives in Washington. And Manal is the acting president of the Center of Middle East and Africa Studies in Washington. Last but not least, my compatriot, Ayman. Ayman Mhanna is the head of the Samir Kassir Center in Beirut. Many of you probably do not know who Samir Kassir is. Samir Kassir was a very prominent Lebanese journalist who was murdered, brutally murdered in the streets of Beirut by Hezbollah. I'm going to start the Syria session this afternoon. I will have few words, but also we want you to vote on two questions. I'll brief you very, very quickly on Syria. I just had a session in the morning for a very different audience of experts and ministers on Syria. I just want to explain to you, for us here in Europe, the Syria crisis is what you call migrants or refugees. Of course, there is a difference between migrants and refugees. The problem in Syria and the crisis in Syria is not that. The crisis in Syria is, if you remember, started 5 years ago with the Syrian people going into having demonstrations, trying to get better lives for themselves. As they say, the rest is history. The regime, so far, because of this quest, have killed about 500,000 people. 200,000 people have been injured, quite badly, most of them. There is at least 50 to 60,000 people in the jails being tortured as we speak. The situation in Syria is dire. People are dying from hunger. Also, there is a peace process going on in Geneva. So I hope my panelists will be able to help us to understand the situation more. And the two questions I would like us to vote on, if possible, and I'm sure you have your iPads. They're supposed to be on my iPad, but since I wrote them, I think I do remember them. One of them is, do you know the difference between a migrant and a refugee? This is number one question. And the second question, I'm hoping it will come in my screen. It hasn't, yes. The second question is, can I have, yeah. Are European leaders showing enough leadership to solve the Syrian crisis? Because I just want to tell you that if the leaders are aware and they know, then if the Syrian crisis is actually solved, then we won't have any refugees. Refugees will be in their countries. I personally am a refugee. I came from Lebanon when Israel invaded my country in 1982, and ever since I've been a refugee in England. And then I have the British nationality now. So there is a bit of a difference there. And hopefully we can see soon, yes, are you aware of the difference? Oh, wow, that's a very informed audience, I'm happy to say. Thank you very much. If you allow me, I'll go to my panelists, and we can start with listening to their opinions. Let me start by Mr. Falah, if you can shed us light and give us your opinion on the situation, please.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to be back at the City Talks.
We have 2 minutes, Falah. 2 minutes.
I see. Oh, half a minute is gone. So when we talk about the Middle East, whether it is Syria, Iraq, or other parts of Middle East and North Africa, we have to go to the history. We can't just put history aside, because it's that history that shapes today and the future. The Sykes-Picot anniversary is this year. Arbitrary drawing of the borders, denying people's identity, ethnicity, religion, and sect. We were obliged to live together based on arbitrary decision. Then, going to the root causes of the problems, lack of democracy, lack of rule of law, lack of social justice, lack of participatory approach from the communities led to this situation today. Therefore, when we talk about Syria, it's not only the Syrian people, and you mentioned European leadership. I would go bigger than that, global leadership, sure. Because today we need an active and engaged global leadership to look into these issues, but also try to incorporate and engage the people in these societies. There are different ways and means in helping situations to change. When you talk about security threat, the security threat is not only to Syria. This is a shared sure. interest. Because when Middle East is not secure, then Europe and beyond is not secure. You talked about the migrants, asylum seekers. When we cannot stabilize their areas, when we cannot keep them there, then they will come to your doorstep and knock at your door as asylum seekers.
Absolutely.
Then lack of democratic institutions is also another problem, because you want to engage with countries in the Middle East with democracies. But sure. lack of democracies would make it more difficult for Europe. That's why we have to look to the root causes of the problem. What can we do in order to bring about the needed change? Sure. Whether that change is coming from within or will it be imposed from outside, this is another question. But second, what kind of change do we want to see in Syria, and who would bring about that change? Where would people be? We have got the Alawites, we have got the Sunnis, we have got the Kurds, we have got the Druze, the Christians, etc. How can we make sure that that diverse community would be able to live together? Shall we go back to the old system, or shall we think about a new system, a new formula that would satisfy the needs and expectations of the communities? That's why denying people their right, denying people their needs and aspirations would not help solve. We need to work at local and regional level, but also at the international level, to bring about those who matter,
yes.
and also the issues that matter to
yes.
all of us.
I'm sorry, I'm giving you all just 2 minutes. I know that the issue is very, very big, but thank you. You've actually put it on very well. I must say that Mr. Falah is in Kurdistan, the Kurdistan region, which is the government of Erbil. This should be known. I'm going to go to Ambassador Aleksander, and I'm going to ask you to please state your position on this on the Syrian.
Yes. You know why Syria matters so much at this critical moment. The critical moment we are going through, all of us, all the international community, is going through in the Middle East. With all these 5 years of sectarian bloodshed, violence, terror, not only from Bashar al-Assad, but also from the other side, from the rebels, from the terrorists, because in the civil war, Russia knows it well. It has an experience of civil war.
Yeah, but
it's
not only Russia that knows it well.
Because in the civil wars, no angels, no devils. And sure. You know, the situation in Syria really became a threat to the global security, and that's why Russia felt itself, you know, obliged to intervene in Syria, to be a partner in finding an influential partner in finding a political solution with using military methods. It is quite normal to combine between the two in these kind of conflict regulation situations. Yes. I contact
okay?
with this.
Thank you, Ambassador. Manal?
Okay. Great, thank you. I'm very happy to be here with everyone today, especially because I don't usually do these type of policy or global security conferences. I'm a proud field mouse. I spend a lot of time on the ground. I've been in Rumbek in South Sudan and Afghanistan. I've been in Iraq, Syria, Libya, a lot of the different conflict zones. And what I want to do a little bit is reshift, rather than telling people in conflict and people in crisis what they need to do, what do we as the international community need to shift as well? Because the way conflict is forming has completely changed. It's protracted, it's long-term. We don't have the short-term types of conflict. And although the crisis is in the Middle East, it's truly a global crisis from the Middle East. So everyone needs to be playing a role in terms of part of the solutions. And just very simple steps, like first, better integrating the cross-border dimensions. The way we're reacting is very isolated. What's happening in Turkey is different than Jordan, is different than Lebanon, and so what's happening inside Syria is very different. Second, we need to move beyond the sequential view. You know, we look at conflict as post, and then there's the humanitarian, then there's stabilization, and it's a very linear way of exploring conflict, and no conflict works that way. It's kind of like a dance, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, 3 steps to the side. So we need to be preparing our programming so it's not so sequential, and we're waiting for the big post-conflict the day after to support Syria. What we need to be doing is supporting now.
Manal,
And
I must throw you to a close, please.
sorry, I have it timed. It's still 1:15, but I'll go on. And then the second area is really allowing people ownership of their programs. We can't just doing basic humanitarian of food and shelter. And just to respect the moderator, I'll go ahead and stop early.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to take as much questions from the audience as possible. Please, Ayman.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. Usually in these conferences, you will hear a lot of acronyms. I'll only use 2 to discuss Syria, and that's it, promise, no more acronyms. What Syria is showing us is RIP, R2P. Rest in peace, responsibility to protect. So if I want to define the Syrian crisis in something specific, is the global failure to protect. And I will also ask 3 questions, or actually summarize the situation in 3 questions that are today at the heart of the debate around Syria. The first one is what to do with the refugees. Second question, what to do with ISIS and the ISIS threat. And the third point, what to do with dictators and the concept of strong men being able to bring stability back. I think these are the 3 questions that somehow are defining how everyone is looking at the situation. Some are trying to solve the refugee crisis without necessarily realizing that the way they are dealing with the refugee crisis is contributing to further radicalization. Some are looking at the radicalization only and completely getting obsessed with the issue of ISIS, not realizing that more people were killed by Assad in Syria than by ISIS inside and outside Syria. And the third point related to dictators, there is a tendency to think that under Saddam, under Gaddafi, under Assad, things were more stable. Even Bernie Sanders, that everyone looks at as someone very progressive, might think that. Many other people in the United States presidential elections are mentioning this. Are we ready to accept the idea that some category of people, because they are browner, because they live on that other side of the Mediterranean, do not deserve democracy because they'll create some troubles? So let's deal with dictators and be happy about this. So I think that later on in the discussion, we'll go further in these 3 points, and I'll be very happy to share my thoughts.
I just want to
Sure,
elaborate.
sure.
You refer to the ISIS crisis and humanitarian crisis. It's the Middle East crisis
Absolutely.
and Syria crisis or Iraq crisis.
Yeah.
It's much bigger than refugees.
But
ISIS,
unfortunately, this is
etc.
how many people are
Not
looking at
forgetting
it.
the Palestinian crisis.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Middle Eastern crisis, because
yes.
we have to go to the roots.
We used to
The
only have
security is
the-
related
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
refugees, etc.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much. As you can see, it's a very interesting debate. It's a very interesting, we have so many questions, we have so many things to answer and so many things to understand. I'm happy to have people coming from different parts of the equation. And I must say, I would love to engage the people in the audience. Of course, I have quite a few questions that are being put on my screen here, which I'm happy to start with. But if anybody at any time would like to pose a question, and for the sake of accommodating many questions as we go on, may I kindly ask you to be as brief as possible. So anybody who would like to engage, all you have to do is just raise your hand, state who you are, and then pose the question. Since I have not seen any hands yet, I'm going to start with my iPad. One anonymous question would be, do you think the West should put their boots on the ground in Syria? That's a very interesting question, and it's a question that has been debated. I am afraid to say this is a little bit late of a question, and already the West has decided that they don't want to go. Our good friend Russia has decided that it can go and then have its own agenda as
not
as
boots
we know.
on the ground.
Yes, there are
it
boots.
makes difference.
No, I'm
It
sorry,
makes
I'm
very
sorry,
good-
Ambassador.
very big difference.
There are boots on the ground. There are people that you have boots on the ground in Syria. Maybe they are there as observers. Maybe they are there as people who are training. But yes, there are boots on the ground. I'm not saying they're doing the fighting. They have other people to do the fighting for them. But yes, I believe there are boots on the ground. Anyway, I'll be very happy for you to answer. Can I ask the panelists, for the sake of the livelihood of the debate and to have as many answers as possible, to keep your answers as brief, to the point as possible. And I have every respect for the ambassador and for Russian diplomacy in some parts of the world, but this is one part of the world that I think many people have question marks. So let's start with you, Ambassador.
You know, it's a good question about the boots on the ground, and does the situation arrive to the critical point when it is necessary to put the boots on the ground, and West's boots on the ground? You know, it's
there are some boots on the ground from the West as well.
Yes, from the West as well.
Yes,
it's well
yes.
known. Special forces,
Yes.
American special forces
Yeah,
are there
it's-
in Iraq and in Syria.
Yes.
It's well known.
Yes.
But not boots on the ground. It means that you know, a vast involvement with the army. It's another meaning, another sense. But if you know the position of Russia, everybody should learn the lessons of previous foreign interventions. I don't want to elaborate on the outcome of foreign intervention in Iraq, on the outcome of foreign intervention in Libya. Isn't it enough? Enough is enough? Because Russia intervened with air forces only.
200 sorties a day, Ambassador. It started with 200 sorties a day. That
Yes.
is a full-blown war
Yeah.
as far as anybody
Yeah.
is concerned.
Just to prevent more chaos, a more war all against war, a more anarchy in this region, spiraling over Lebanon, your native country,
My lovely country.
spiraling over Jordan. If Russia didn't intervene, Islamists would have been in Damascus now, and with nobody sharing power in. So the Russian intervention was in time and was on purpose, and the outcome of Russian intervention has led to restoring balances, military balances on the ground first, and giving an impetus to political settlement. We are witnessing now to the Geneva talks. We are witnessing now.
Thank you, Ambassador.
So if I
Yes,
can
would you
respond.
like to have
Absolutely.
a
I think
comment?
it's really important when we're looking at boots on the ground to expand the question, because the foreign interventions that the ambassador speaks of, it's not just the idea of boots on the ground. It was just boots. So we need boots, heels, slippers, tennis shoes, a holistic approach to really dealing with this conflict. That's when foreign intervention fails, when we only look at a military solution. We need to look at a full solution to this crisis.
Well, in fact, just to refer to the intervention in Iraq, as a Kurd who suffered from Saddam Hussein, that was the right decision.
Yeah.
To liberate the Iraqi people from the tyranny of Saddam Hussein. It was as a result of the Kurdish Spring in 1990 when we were able to build democratic institutions. We are where we are now today in Syria. This is an election year for the United States. Europe alone would not adopt a military solution.
Yes,
So
we all
this
know
is our
that.
understanding.
Yes, yes.
And now the military option is not on the table. Therefore, what we have is to define the terrorist groups.
But no, I'm sorry. Actually, Russia is there militarily in full scale. They have, I'm sorry, and also your intervention, if I may say, Ambassador, is not accepted by all the Syrians. Your intervention is there to shore up Mr. Assad and the Iranian intervention in Syria. Not everybody agrees with your assessment of the intervention. You are there almost in full force. You have your best equipment. You have. I mean, I can't imagine any more bigger intervention.
I was referring to a military intervention to change the regime.
Yeah.
This was my talk about military intervention.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now
it's
we
a
have got
change.
two coalitions, one led by the United States, the other is led by Russia. So we don't know to what extent and degree they cooperate and they have the same objective.
Exactly, because
That's the
I
key
think
question.
Russia now and the United States, this is at least what the Russians tell us, and the United States, that they're trying to work together towards a peaceful solution, which is supposed to happen in the next 18 months.
Which means military option is out of question.
Yes, indeed, for the time being. But what is happening now, as a matter of fact, is that it seems that the Americans are giving a lot of leverage to the Russians inside Syria due to many of their failures of foreign policy in the area, and I'm sorry to refer to it. I'm going to take another question because this is really a very interesting debate that we're entering into.
So which means we agree to disagree on every question.
Which is a lovely equation, in my opinion. This is the, yes, sure, would you like to? Yes, there. Can you say who you are, please, and if you have any affiliation?
My name is Baria Alamuddin. I work as a humanitarian worker for international organization, and I have personal experience from Turkish-Syrian border 2 years ago, more or less. Let's say there is enough capacity, enough determination, enough public support, whatever it would require, to put the boot on the ground. What should be the goal of such an intervention? What is the solution for Syria?
Sure. I think this is a rather complicated question, but a very good question. Thank you very much for asking it.
No, it's not so complicated.
Yeah, but Russia being there, and Russia can
I'm not talking about
and Russia
Russia.
can tell us what to do in the area. That's easy. I understand
The question
that.
is clear. It says West. It doesn't
Yes.
include Russia.
Yes.
So my question is, what should be the final goal of such intervention if you are talking about West?
Well, I think the final call must be a peaceful Syria. I'm sure the Russians would say that they want a peaceful, democratic one Syria, not a divided
But right now
Syria.
There's another question.
The question
There should
is
be another
West.
question.
Yes.
And also, in terms of Western intervention,
Can I just?
we cannot only look at it as military boots on the ground or no intervention. There were so many tools that were not used, so many instruments that were not used to protect the Syrian people over these years that mean intervention, but not necessarily direct military intervention. When the withdrawal of ambassadors happened, it was a time where ambassadors could have had their own boots on the ground in cities where demonstrations were taking place. We wouldn't have seen the same kind of killing that happened. There were so many things related to supporting host communities in countries neighboring Syria to provide better access and better welcoming of the refugees that would create a more stable situation around Syria that can help Syria as well. The West has failed the region in so many different aspects, and I'm honestly not talking about military intervention. So the failure is much bigger than that.
Thank you, Ayman. I would like to take the question from the gentleman. Could you kindly state who you are and your affiliation?
My name is Matthew Kwazaborski. I'm with the Fund for American Studies. I'm an American who lives in Prague next door. So I have two questions. The first is for the Kurdish independence movement, and the Kurds have been pretty much taking up a lot of the fighting on the ground, or the boots on the ground, the Peshmerga forces, as well as the ones in Syria. How do you see and please, Mr. Ambassador, answer this, how do you see the Kurdish independence movement going from here? Because I think it would be fully supported within the international community. And Mr. Ambassador, how do you explain sort of the Russian intervention in Syria that were bombing hospitals and schools and all of those random places in Aleppo, Whereas with American intervention in Iraq, we were actually targeting the ISIS leaderships, and there has been no such reports from the Russian media that you actually targeted ISIS leaderships. Thank you very much.
So the question is for, first question is for you, and then please, Ambassador, please.
Well, as far as the Kurds are concerned, of course, we are the largest nation in the world that we are denied a state of our own. We were divided against our will to be communities in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. The largest Kurdish population is in Turkey, the smallest is in Syria. But I talk about Iraqi Kurdistan. Since the establishment of Iraqi state, we were attached to Iraq because Iraq is an artificial state. It was put together to keep some balances. Even during those old days, they wanted to install a Sunni king in Iraq, but the Sunnis were the minority, Shias were the majority. They attached Kurdistan to keep that balance. So something that was built on wrong foundations, and we paid a huge price. We were supposed to be equal partners in this country, partners in decision-making, to share the power, to share the wealth, and to be equal citizens. From the establishment of the Iraqi state until today that I'm talking to you, we have never been dealt with as equal citizens. We have never been considered as first-class or first-class citizens, because always we were referred to as second-class citizens. And our share in living together in Iraq has been the destruction of 4,500 villages, the use of chemical gas against the Kurdish people, the disappearance of 182,000 people in the Anfal operations, the disappearance of 8,000 Barzani men, 12,000 Faili Kurds, all that. We lived under a centralized system. It did not work, it failed. We lived under autonomy agreement, it failed. And this is 13 years after the fall of the regime. We are trying, now it's the rule of the Shias in Iraq. We have the same problems, economic warfare. They have cut our budget. They don't support us in the fight against ISIS. They don't support us in dealing with the refugees and IDPs. Therefore, we are neither fully integrated into Iraq, nor are we fully independent. Right now, the Kurdish leadership is seriously considering a serious discussion with Baghdad in order to define and determine the future, which way to go. We are considering a Czech and Slovak type of an amicable divorce in order to be two good neighbors and not to live under such kind of rule where our partnership is rejected and we reject their subordination.
I think you put it very, very well, I must say, Falah. Would you like to answer the question as brief as you can,
The question
please?
was why Russia is bombing schools and hospitals. I advise you not to fall victim of misinformation, because, such much misinformation are spreading over the world now by all sources, not only Western, in Russia as well. A lot of misinformation.
I can't believe you hear it in Russia.
You should divide. Yes. You should divide between what is true and what is false. And I cannot believe that Russia is bombing schools and hospitals. In Libya, how many victims from civil populations fall as a result of NATO bombing in Libya. It is side effects, and it happens everywhere.
Thank you, Ambassador. I must move to the second one, and I don't want to enter a debate here between Russia and the West, because we will never finish. Do you have
on the Kurdish question? I do want to bring.
Can you be as brief as
very
possible?
quick? I just think we have to remember the do no harm, because what's happening a lot with not addressing the issue of Kurdistan, we may be setting up the next conflict in the region. Don't forget, we're both training the central government's army in Iraq and Baghdad, and we're providing support to the Peshmerga. So, again, do no harm. In 10 years, we've had no real conversations over the status of Kirkuk, despite the fact that it is in the Constitution, Article 140. So by not having these conversations, we're really setting ourselves up for future conflict.
Thank you very much. I just don't want to go into Iraq. We have an enough complex situation in Syria.
Syria,
Can we
yes.
stick to Syria? And then Ayman will move to Lebanon. No, thank you very much. We're staying with Syria. Okay? And I do understand your wishes, really. It's just that it's not acceptable. We don't have enough time. If you want to go to the Middle East and discuss all the problems, we'll be here in a month or so. So,
And if you think you understood it, it means that someone didn't explain it properly.
Thank you. Okay, now I want to take from the audience. Yes, please, the lady. Can you please state your name and your affiliation, if you have any?
My name is Anka Drago. I'm a journalist with the Slovak Public Radio, and I will ask a question which is not related to Russia. So,
thank you.
You in Lebanon have the experience of having almost a lost generation, you know, intelligent people, young people who suffered a lot because of war. In Syria, we see it every day on our TV screens, at least, you know, we had a panel about refugees. When the bombs will clear the situation, whatever situation will be solved somehow, how difficult and how much it will take, based on your experience as Lebanese, to rebuild that country? Not in terms of like rebuilding the buildings, but rebuilding society and making them live together.
Yes, I'm going to take the privilege of answering this question. Also, I'll ask Ayman, because I'm your typical refugee, but not in the full sense. And my family left Lebanon in 1982 when my country was being bombed by Israel. We actually went on an American ship and then went to Cyprus, and the Cypriot people were marvelous people, went to England. We were the lucky ones who were able to go to England. We had a little bit. It's very difficult to leave your country. It's very difficult to hear the bombing of your country while you are on an American ship, knowing the role of the American administration in that war, and indeed the weapons it had given Israel. So I don't want to go there. That's another conflict, but believe me, it is a very, very sad and difficult situation for the Lebanese. And we in Lebanon, as you know, we have about 2 million Syrian refugees. We have about 30% intermarriages between the Syrians and the Lebanese. We're almost one family, Lebanon and Syria. We share religions. We have Christians in both countries. We have Muslims in both countries. It's a very, very difficult situation what we have in Lebanon. I don't want to tell you the difficulties my family went through. We probably are the lucky ones, but I would refer to Ayman to say a few words about it.
And I look at the future. I will not talk about the past. It will need a lot of time, a lot of resources, and I'm talking about money. And this is why what is happening in the West is also very important in terms of how you guys vote. Every time you are voting for political parties that want to decrease international foreign aid, that want to decrease the funding going to organizations like USIP, like the German foundations, Heinrich Böll, Konrad Adenauer, National Democratic Institute, IRI, you are contributing to a situation where the support that is needed in terms of transitional justice, in terms of knowledge to build institutions, in order to support local universities, local think tanks that are thinking locally on how to rebuild the country from an institutional perspective, you will be harming yourself, because the situation will not settle. There will be more crises, more refugees, more tensions, more radicalization that will blow up in everybody's face.
Thank you.
I'd like to interfere and also mention the case of the Yazidis, who have suffered under the hands of ISIS, but also the Sunni Arab neighbors. So therefore, rebuilding trust between the communities is important.
Who are these Sunni Arabs? Are you
Sunni
referring to
Arabs,
Daesh?
No, Sunni Arab residents of the villages next door neighbors of Yazidi areas.
Who were run over by Daesh?
Run over by Daesh, joined ISIS, and some of them, before ISIS arrived in their areas, they committed crimes against them. Therefore, we think about physical reconstruction, but also building confidence, building peaceful coexistence among these communities, and it's not easy. The same thing for the Christians who have been ousted from Mosul, where there were the noon end letter was written on their doors that they had to leave. That's why The physical reconstruction is much easier than building trust among the communities to do that.
And that's why we have to start now. We can't wait for the post-conflict era to do social cohesion.
Can I ask the speakers to please let me give them the floor so that we can have some...
Sure, as long as you give it, so that's fine.
Yeah, no, I will. I was
Great.
just looking at you.
Thank you. Great.
Okay.
So should I continue or?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Because the social cohesion has to start now. I think it's really important to really think no one country is going to be stabilized. We have to start looking at the region as a region. We created artificial borders to say, you know, let's just look at Syria, let's just look, you know, Tunisia will fall if we don't stabilize Libya. I mean, we have to look at the region. Otherwise, we're going to have one conflict draw out another conflict. And once we think we solved it, you know, mission accomplished, we'll find ourselves back to ground zero in each of these areas if we're not dealing with the region holistically.
I mean, that's a whole image that you're giving. Thank you very much. But the thing is, let's try and concentrate on Syria. I understand why you would like to extend to Iraq because, of course, of your interest there. No, I do understand, except that there is a lot to take on Syria. And I'm going to take a question from the floor there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Adrian Newman. I'm part of the GLOBSEC Young Leaders Program. And I come from the Institute for Security Policy in Germany. But I ask this question in my personal capacity. I think we all agree that Syria is in big turmoil, and we could probably speak of a war all against all in a Hobbesian way. And we've seen that so far, soft power approaches, which I think Joseph Nye said require moral authority and legitimacy, have failed also because part of these things are lacking actually in the West. So the people of you who have been on the ground, I would like to ask the question, how much more suffering is necessary for the Syrian people, not for us, for the Syrian people to accept a Leviathan who just come in and say, you know, it doesn't matter who started, they just say, as long as there has been enough killing, we just want peace.
Thank you very much for your very humanitarian question. And many people, we talk about policies, we talk about interests, we talk about countries, and we forget the suffering of the people. More than 400,000 people have been killed. We have 200,000 people injured and maimed for life. And these are and we have also hundreds, at least 40,000 in the jails of Bashar al-Assad that we don't think about. I'm going to give my panel the right to answer you, but each one please in 1 minute. Can I start with you over there?
People want peace. They are, I think, they want a peaceful solution, and without thinking about like who started and who didn't start. But if actually this question is not answered through a credible transitional justice period the day after, it's recipe for another disaster 5 days later. Yeah. And it will be even bigger because the feelings of frustration will be bigger than the ones that were nurtured over 40 years.
Thank you, Mr. Falah.
We do not live in an ideal world to talk about the feelings of the people. We live in a real world when we have left the people of Syria without any power because the regional powers interfered, each with its own agenda, and imposed that on the Syrians so that we ended up with ISIS, with Jabhat al-Nusra, with Ahrar al-Sham, with so on and so forth. Dozens of armed groups are fighting in Syria. Therefore, they did not leave any room for the Syrian people to determine what do they want.
Thank you very much. But I really like your question, and I like the humanitarian approach. We forget that all these people that have died have mothers, have sisters, have brothers, have families, have people who love them and care for them. And I thank you for that. Please, Ambassador.
Your question brings us to the Geneva negotiation process.
Sure.
Because much depends on the outcome of this process. And previous experience on conflict regulations teach us that when no one seems to able to win a political deal may help achieve much. Political deal may help achieve much, but not all that every party wants to. It's a rule. And as soon as neither side is going to achieve all its goals, they must moderate their ambition. Today, we have two excessive approaches. One excessive approach from the regime, national unity government. And with the inclusion of opposition into the present government of Bashar Assad. It's unrealistic at all. It is too late and too little. It's one excessive approach. Another excessive approach from the opposition. They want the power handed to them over the plate with a silver contour.
A bit of democracy,
yes,
perhaps, there,
with a silver
Ambassador.
contour.
Yeah, no.
It's the second excessive approach. So,
can I ask you to wrap up?
Yes, so there should be something in the middle. There should be power sharing, and Russia is working now on the power sharing. And boots on the ground should be Syrian boots on the ground. Government forces of Syria with the moderate rebel forces together.
Sure.
This is the only boots on the ground acceptable.
Thank you, Ambassador, for putting across the Russian point of view very clearly. Please.
It's exactly what's
At last
happening.
you agreed with me. Thank you.
I don't agree with anything you said. No.
You
please
should have
don't
just
put
let it
words in
go.
my
It
mouth.
was a good moment. Absolutely, this is the Leviathan type of like social contract renegotiations. That's why people are taking to the street. My fear, and Ayman already touched on it, is without the proper mechanisms of transitional justice, what's going to happen is the opposite. People are going to dig in their heels. The more they lose, the less they want that loss to be for nothing. And so people really want some type of outcome. Otherwise, 5 years will be of murder and slaughter and no change. It's going to be hard, which is why the transitional mechanism is absolutely essential. And again, we need to be talking about it from now, not waiting for the day after. That's what set us up for failure in each of the conflicts we intervened. Yeah. We waited too long.
Thank you very much. I have a very interesting question on my iPad, and I don't see any hands. I always prefer hands, but I'm going to take this question. The question is as follows. To defeat Daesh, do you think Assad should stay in power, at least temporarily? In my opinion, I would like him to have gone yesterday, if that means. I will ask my panelists. I think that Assad and Daesh are very much in concert. I think he gave them a lot of leverage inside Syria because they serve his purposes. And I'll go to my panel now and ask them.
I'll answer with an example.
But can I ask you to be very brief?
Like in every other question, sure.
Thank you.
So I'll give you quickly an example of Lebanese former minister, Mr. Samaha, who was one of Assad's closest allies, and he brags about it all the time.
He's in jail, by the way.
Yeah, I'll tell his story, and his story is my answer to this question. So, Mr. Samaha brought to Lebanon in his own car, an Audi A8, around 50 kilograms of bombs, including types of small bombs that killed Samir Kassir, the journalist after which my foundation is named, and so many other bombs of different shapes and sizes. And he hired a guy to go and conduct assassinations and bombings, targeting Sunni sheikhs, the Maronite patriarch, who is a cardinal of the Catholic Church, and telling him also that at a later stage, we will bomb in the Alawite areas, so people think that radical Sunnis did this. He didn't know that the guy was filming, and he was a double agent. And this movie is available, and Samaha explains that the bomb were given to me from President Assad's office, and the only two people who know about what I have and the plans are President Assad and his chief of security. It's on tape.
Yes.
And it's on tape talking to the guy who he hired. Then, of course, it leaked, and the guy is now in jail. He was sentenced to 13 years in jail. It means that this is something that Assad was doing last year, while Daesh was still also operating. So the idea of separating that there are better guys and good guys, and probably Assad is better, Assad is plotting killing of Alawite people in Lebanon, people of his own community, just to put the blame on others. I don't know how we can deal with this guy.
Well,
yes,
we
please,
have not.
I'm sorry, only 400 words in a newswire on AFP, Reuters, and AP appeared about the story I told you. I'm still baffled by the idea of having a former government minister explaining what the Assad office asked him to do, getting absolutely no international coverage.
Thank you, Ayman. Thank you,
Yes.
please.
When we talk about ISIS, in fact, we have not seen a direct clash or fight between ISIS and Syrian forces.
Absolutely.
Therefore, this is an alibi. Daesh or ISIS has nothing to do with the Syrian regime, because the Syrian regime is fighting with other groups. There are other groups other than Daesh or ISIS fighting the Syria. And second, when we talk about defeating ISIS, we can defeat them physically on the ground, but we have to do it both in Iraq and Syria, because ISIS it's the capital of the caliphate in Mosul and Raqqa. So Raqqa is the second most important, Mosul is the first. That's why first is the physical fight in the ground, in the battlefield, which we are proud of the role of the Peshmergas in this 1,050 kilometers long front line that we are engaged. Second, we have to fight the ideology behind it. It's not only the terrorists who are on the ground, but that ideology, the large number of people who have been recruited by ISIS. Therefore, there isn't that kind of direct relationship between Assad and ISIS.
Thank you very much. I think it's very, very important.
I mean, I find the discussion very nice and emotional. However, I think we should also stick to the truth. I mean,
Please, tell us your truth.
I'm not a supporter of Assad.
Can I have your name and who you are, please?
I'm Willem de Wolf, I work in Holland. But Assad just freed Palmyra from IS, in my opinion, with help of Russians. So he is fighting
He gave it
IS.
to them. He gave it to them. He gave it to them.
Stories however you want.
No, I'm not telling. I'm telling you the truth. He gave it to them. We all know it's documented. Please.
By whom? Documented.
It's not by the Russians, of course. Okay, would you like to finish your intervention?
I mean, I think he's not a good person, you know.
Yes, sure.
I'm sure about that. However, if we want to come to a solution, we also have to be honest in everything, you know. And there was a huge fight in Palmyra, you know, where soldiers died, you know, from one side to the other side, you know, and it's a loss of life, which is very regrettable. But he is doing something.
But
also
after
against
2 years,
ISIS.
this is the first time.
I agree on that, you know.
Because when ISIS was
very
in the headquarters of the governorate of Raqqa, not a single
right.
time that building was shot.
right.
We
You're
live
right.
in there. We don't live in Holland. We live in there.
Yes.
We have got.
I've lived in Damascus. I've lived in Baghdad 1 year also. So, and I've been in Erbil lots of
No,
times.
but thank you. I really appreciate your intervention, and it's very interesting to listen to all different points of view. It's just for people who are living in the area and are very, very close to what's happening. I understand that this is a very sore subject, the subject of Daesh. It's ruining lives, it's changing the face of the area, and it's a very serious matter. And anybody that cooperates with people like Daesh is a conspirator in destroying the area. This is not the face of any religion, and no religion will accept people like Daesh. Thank you. Any other intervention? I'm going to go to the panel as well. Would you like to say something, Ambassador?
You know, for the recent 2 years, there have been a dispute. What comes first? The defeating Daesh or political settlement in Syria?
Sure.
And to Russia's opinion, and because political, at that time, now at this critical moment, political settlement in Syria is a key to defeating Daesh.
But you have not been fighting Daesh, Ambassador. The Russians have not been fighting Daesh. They've
No,
been
no,
fighting
no.
everybody else.
I would not say so definitely as you say.
No, not
Say
definitely.
these things
indefinitely.
so definitely.
Sure.
So the matter is why Syria is a key. Why Syria is a key? I explained because there is a possibility to unite all ground forces against Daesh in case
The
of
Russians to
political
unite
settlement.
with the Americans and the Europeans and is this what you are advocating?
You know, de facto there is a coalition, not de jure. De facto
very
there is a
odd
coalition
coalition,
between
yeah.
Russia and America.
Yes,
There is a coalition.
now they're trying to bring in the solution. It's a very odd one, by the way. Please.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a real tension. You know, how do we combat, you know, the dictatorships that people are uprising versus violent extremism that's emerging? And ISIS is one of the violent extremist groups that have emerged. There are many. And, you know, we
Yes.
all celebrated when bin Laden was killed with Al-Qaeda, right? And then suddenly we have a more mutated, barbaric version. And it will happen again if we defeat ISIS. So, you know, the question is, when do we make a pact with the devil? Because that's the question we're asking. If we make a pact with Assad, you know, at what cost? And I think the points about transition, everything that you already made, I won't repeat, are completely spot on. We have to deal with it. Otherwise, we'll just find a new violent extremist group emerge in a few years.
You know, the Russians came in with a tremendous force. And if it was really directed toward Daesh, I think in the last 6 months, we probably would have finished by Daesh. I give you that, Ambassador. Can I go on? Anybody from the floor would like to pose a question, or shall I go on with the questions on my iPad? Okay. Well, there are no angels or devils in a civil war. I think we all agree with that. They're all devils. No? Why does Russia support only one side of a conflict, that is the Assad one? I think I would like to answer this, Ambassador.
It's not right. It's not right, absolutely.
I didn't ask it.
Absolutely.
It's on my iPad.
It's not right, absolutely.
So you support...
Russia does not support only one side. First, Russia has never said that Assad must stay. The United States said Assad must go. Russia never said Assad must stay. And you know, there is an agreement now that the fate of Assad, yes, certainly, I cannot imagine, and no one can imagine the future of Syria with Assad. It's, you know, it's an undisputable question.
Good.
Yes, but how to approach to this political, very sensitive political issue, that's the question. One approach, silly approach, is it is precondition. Assad must go during the political transition or before the political transition. It doesn't. It doesn't suit at all. Assad, this question must be on the agenda at the certain point of the political process. It is much more doable, much more workable than any other options. And the West should hear Russia more than it hears.
Thank you, Ambassador.
More.
Yes, yes.
No, when we talk about ISIS, both in Iraq and Syria, in Iraq is easier and clear. ISIS on the one hand, then Iraqi forces, Kurdish forces. In Syria, it's complicated. One thing that has saved Assad is the lack of alternative. What is the alternative for the Assad regime that has kept them? That's why. Is it al-Nusra? Is it Daesh? Is it the tens of armed groups? Or is there a moderate opposition that would be able to take
It is a mess, but there
over?
are the Syrian people as well, and these are the legitimate owners of Syria. These are the legitimate people who live in Syria and who have a stake in the future of Syria and who should decide the future of Syria. It's not Russia, it's not the Americans, it's not the Europeans. Thank you very much.
Right.
I'm going to go with another.
Second question is allowed.
Yes, please.
We always speak about...
You are nice, so I'm going to allow you to.
That's very kind. We always speak about ISIS. My understanding is, or would be my question, would a more, let's say, actor-centric strategy help to beat them? Because they're not one, you know, they understand from Iraq, there would be all Ba'athists in there. We've got foreign fighters, so people with they've got some same interests, people who use the label ISIS and fight on it, but there must also be different interests, which you can classically divide and rule.
Yeah, that's why
start. Can I please you wait until I tell you? Yes, please start now. Otherwise, we're
There's
going to have a
definitely a
chaotic
multifaceted
debate.
approach to that war that is absolutely necessary. The military fights on various levels on the ground, but also this idea of creating these offshoots is very much linked to availability of funding. The funding channels going to the various arms and organs of ISIS are so complex and different. There have been some successes in some places, but also big failures elsewhere, including the fact that you can still transfer money from Damascus to Raqqa, and people working in public administrations in Raqqa still get their salary from Damascus, although they operate in ISIS territory. Same thing about the funding going elsewhere. Plus the idea of countering the message and all the work related to communication. And at the end, it's also a question of criminality. Very often, ISIS brand is being put on people who have been involved in criminal activities before, so the better cooperation between the police side and the intelligence side and the army side, which has been lacking, and Belgium is a recent example, is also needed. So there is no one silver bullet, it's all these different aspects at the same time.
Thank you very much, Minister.
In fact, we have to admit that both Iraq and Syria have failed. These are failed states because of the wrongdoings and the wrong policies of these two states. Second, the wrong policies of former Prime Minister Maliki in marginalizing, excluding the Sunnis from the political process led to the Sunni community welcome ISIS when they came. Right now, some of them are separate. Third, we have to understand that it's not only foreign fighters who are there. Yes, as you rightly mentioned, former Ba'athist members are there, Islamic groups are there, the Naqshbandi army, etc., etc. There are too many groups which are there, and also in addition to the local Sunnis in these areas who have joined them. They still get financial support, economic support. That's why it's important to fight them economically to get rid of these things. But fighting ISIS is not easy. It may take some time. Physically, militarily, we fight them in the front line. We have to fight them ideologically, economically, to deny them access, to deny them the logistic support they have. But they have got also not only people from the Middle East, people who are born to European parents. They have been able to recruit and go beyond the limits of Middle East and Islamic countries.
Thank you very much for this. I think we all should understand that Daesh is an ideology and a philosophy that has been very well sold in Europe and in the West. And we all have a role in understanding what this Daesh is. It's an evil, very evil group of people, and they are able to recruit. I'm hoping that now in Europe, at least, that people are waking up to the truth of Daesh and maybe are able to recruit us. But this is something that you and I, as a European, should really understand and should really work against. I'm going to, we have another 8 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and would you like to comment, anybody on this side? Okay, thank you very much.
You know, it's only
Quickly.
1 minute, if, with your permission.
Sure, of
with
course.
Your permission.
Go ahead, Ambassador, sure.
Yes, and now the question of power sharing is on the agenda. And the question arises, power sharing with whom? With whom? There are moderate Islamists, so-called, militant Islamists, Daesh, not only Daesh, Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra are interrelated and interrelated with Ahrar al-Sham, with many other, more than 60 organizations in the Aleppo region. And only 1/3 of them could be considered as moderate.
By your standards.
So with whom?
By your standard, by Russian
with
standards.
Whom?
No, I'm sorry, this is not a
No.
legitimate, I'm sorry, there
With
are
whom?
people you can talk to. It's just that
Power
it depends.
sharing.
Yeah,
That's
power
a
sharing.
very important question.
Yes, yes, there are many people sitting now in Geneva negotiating.
If you want
that
Islamists
could
to
be.
come to power in
No,
Damascus,
it's not Islamist. I'm not talking about Islamists, but also I don't want fundamentalists on the Assad side. But anyway, there is a question there from the audience. Please state who you are and your question.
My question is about future of Syria to Mr. Ambassador, and it's about Syrian Kurds. They want federalization of Syria, but Bashar Assad say no. He doesn't want. Mr. Ambassador, will be Russia support Kurds or Bashar Assad?
Bashar Assad.
you know,
Sorry, Ambassador, I'm
you know,
sorry.
yes.
Yeah, I will let you answer that, please.
Yeah.
Minister.
Well, as Kurds,
I don't
we
know
have
there is
Kurdish
two ambassadors
community
here. I didn't know.
I think
but,
yes. We can call
We
him a minister,
support
we can call
federalism,
Falah a
but we
minister.
believe that Syria cannot go back to what it was. It would be difficult to go back to the older Syria. No matter what has happened, there has to be a new arrangement, a new system, a new formula. As far as we are concerned, we welcome a federal solution for the communities who live in Syria to be part of that system, because the one Syria policy would fail.
Along the sides of what you want in Iraq, I presume.
Well, it has its own characteristics, but
Sure,
a federal
sure.
system in Syria.
Sure, yeah, that is actually being discussed.
I agree completely with my Kurdish,
Yeah, I agree.
Kurdish
Although
colleague.
this is not the stated policy of Moscow.
Yes, I agree
Thank you.
completely. Yeah.
Yes, no comment. Yes,
Just
please.
one element related to federalism. I might also support it, but we need to make sure that, let's say if Syria is divided into 3 entities, federal entities within one state, that there is no dictatorship within each one of the federate states. The idea is a solution that brings true democracy and true representation at every level. Not, okay, let the Sunni live under a Sunni autocrat, the Kurds under a Kurdish autocrat, and the Alawites under an Alawite autocrat. This is not a solution.
I just want to tell you something to put things in perspective for you. I grew up in Lebanon, and I grew up in Beirut, and honestly, I promise you, I had no idea what my neighbor was, if they were Christians or Muslims. I never knew there was Sunni and Shia until, you know, like 10 years back or so. This was not existing in the Middle East, and everybody lived happily ever after. We had the most amazing life in Beirut, singing, dancing, going to plays, getting lovely education. That's the kind of now wars we live in. Yes, I think there is a lady here and a gentleman after.
I'm another humanitarian worker. I have two questions. First question is related to the Russia discussion about entering and not entering into Syria. When I was working on the Syrian conflict 3 years ago, there was a discussion in the West about entering into Syria, and then Russia was actually the one who stopped it. And I was, by the time, against it, because but when I was talking to the Syrians, they actually was expecting it, because they say that it's better when 10,000 people died due to fighting than another 500,000 for within another 3 years of war.
Your question, please.
The question is why Russia changed their mind in a few years later. And then the second question is when the Syria will allow the humanitarian assistance actually enter inside Syria, because what maybe people don't know that, for example, after Russian entering in some part of the Syria, northern Hama and southern Idlib was accessible by the time by humanitarian assistance, but after entering Russian, the humanitarian assistance was moved closer to the border.
Thank you very much. I think you should answer this quickly.
I didn't catch your question really. Why Russia changed its mind? Mind on what?
Intervention.
Yeah.
When was the discussion about in the West, the Russia was the one who stopped it, and they say they don't want to enter, but now you enter.
Discussion on what subject?
On interference in Syria.
On interference.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, can you be as brief as possible? We have only 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, because
let him answer.
The developments, the very, very catastrophic developments in Syria, with nobody taking any decision. You know, Europe is unable, United States is unwilling. Europe disappeared as an influential political actor from Middle Eastern scene. So who else except Russia and the United States?
I'm sorry, but I do agree with you.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. And China, by the way, China pretends as if nothing happens at all.
They are your allies, Ambassador. Please.
I wanted to thank everyone to share opinions on this important issue and have just a small remark from my side. With my due respect, when you speak about Russian actions, like sarcasm, irony, it's so visible, so hearable, like it's possible to be a little bit in the middle, to stand judgeable without using personal issues, personal conflicts. I would appreciate it, okay? Thank you very much.
Yes, if I may explain to you something, I have every respect for and love for the Russian people. It's the Russian policies that I object to inside Syria. The Russian people are, I'm sure, lovely people, and I have family in Russia as well. It's just that I do not agree with Russian policies in that part of the world. And I do not agree that Russia should use overwhelming force inside Syria and do what it's actually doing. We have very little time to go into details of this, but I'm glad, but thank you, I do respect. I do respect.
Moderator should be in the middle.
I do respect.
Right.
Yes, but also I'm a human being, and I am also receiving the results of your policies. I'm sorry about this. You might be right. No. I tell you, I have family. I have family in Russia, but yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we are coming almost to the close of our yeah. So I'm going to ask my panelists to each give 1 minute of closing remarks, and then ask your appreciation for them. And thank you for attending and for bearing maybe my emotions that are, I'm sure you understand why. I'm Lebanese and I'm suffering a lot. We have about 2 million refugees in Lebanon. We also have Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and it's not very human to have all these refugees in one small country. Please, Ayman.
Thank you. My last point would be the importance of looking ahead long term. The way the recent EU-Turkey agreement on dealing with the refugee issue is not very coherent with also the other priority of the EU to contribute to de-radicalization. Sending a message to people that you are not welcome unless you're Christian. You are not welcome. Go back to where you've escaped from, has a very high risk of actually contributing to the radicalization. We cannot solve one problem by increasing the other. And the examples of lack of coherence in policy is huge. We want these refugees to stay in neighboring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and Turkey, while only giving support to these countries after they blackmail us, which is what Turkey did. So this lack of coherence will blow up in everybody's face, in our face, and the Syrian people's face, and the European face. This is why real thinking, long-term, smart policies, and keeping away with emotions and populism will be the way forward to find a real solution.
Thank you, Ayman. Mr. Falah.
Well, thank you for your attention. I would like to tell you that I come from Kurdistan region of Iraq. We have lost 1,415 Peshmergas in the fight against ISIS in the last 2 years. We have 8,345 Peshmergas who have been wounded. We are proud that we are in the front line engaging in this tough and difficult war with this brutal organization. As a result of the crisis in Syria and instability in Iraq, we are home to 1.8 million displaced people from the rest of Iraq and refugees from Syria. Unfortunately, we do not get the appreciation and respect of the outside world. People talk about Turkey, people talk about Jordan, people talk about Lebanon, but they don't mention Kurdistan region of Iraq. We are at war and engaged in this war in the front line. We are hosting these communities and we are facing economic challenges, and Baghdad does not support us, and Baghdad has cut our budget. Therefore, I want you, and through you, to the people of Europe and to GLOBSEC, to appreciate what Kurdistan region is doing for safety, security, and stability.
Thank you very much. Please, quickly. Yeah. Can I ask you to be very brief, please?
Yes. If somebody doesn't like Russian intervention, I would like to talk on Russian pulling out. Russian pulling out is signal to two sides, to Syrians. First, Syrian authorities. Russia is not going to do their work instead of them. First.
Thank you.
And second, no, don't interrupt me. I just
Go ahead.
Did not, it's not over. The second signal to the West, that Russia is seriously and is not going to waste its efforts for reaching a settlement in Syria for the happiness and the well-being of its people.
Thank you. Please.
How we understand Syria is really defining how we understand conflict. And it's not only about Syria really understanding the role of state. I mean, the borders are being challenged, really understanding the role of governance, the social contract between citizen and people. It's really important that we understand the significance of the shift that's happening, which is truly global. And part of the answer is to make sure we don't get stuck in the extremes, because those are the options that keep being presented. Either Assad, we accept dictatorship and authoritarianism, or Daesh, we accept chaos and anarchy. And there's a wide spectrum in the middle that we really have to start answering, because again, turn to Yemen, turn to Libya, we're going to be facing these questions over and over, and all these countries have proximity to Europe. So there's no way of containment or isolation. It will come back to haunt each and every country.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending, and can we show appreciation for the panelists? Thank you.
Great.